so we just came up with this idea right now. I haven't done it yet. Our category would be a cooperative group presentation. The activity that we thought of doing is that most companies have, as Bill knows, some kind of a manual or policies and procedures, a handbook. And we want them to understand what the purpose of the handbook is and how to abide by what's in the handbook when they do get into a potential employer. So we would separate, I have about 25 students in the class, so I would separate them into probably 5 groups of 5, potentially by major, because I have all students from all majors in the class, at least the majors on our campus. And each group would have a distinct set of policies that they would have to write for the potential company manual. So your group might be dress code. Another group might be internet and computer usage, things like that, and all that other good stuff that's in there. Then when the group is done writing their policies, they would have to write at least 1 policy per person in the group, so at least 5. They would present it to the rest of the class, and the rest of the class would determine if that was a good enough policy or if it was too strict, because students might think of really strict settings, but not all companies are, I guess, super stringent, or maybe not stringent enough. And then, of course, the class would determine whether or not that's good. I would, if I would be able to, ask maybe Bill for our own Bryan and Stratton company manual and present that to the class to see how as an educational institution, how our manual looks. But also reach out maybe to other companies and see what theirs looks like to see what these students would be looking at for their employer one day. And that's it. Right?
Oftentimes, this is kind of a precursor leading into
Yes.
A presenter. Now, this would be the activity they would do the class before having a person that would come in to speak on professionalism in the workplace and expectations in the workplace. I gave the example of a student I know that was a medical student, and they were not allowed to go back into their medical internship site because they came in with a very radical haircut, and they didn't feel that that was appropriate for the workplace. So some adjustments had to be made, and he says, well, what about my individualism, my individuality, and sometimes that goes to the wayside with company expectations and professionalism in the workplace.
Okay, thank you. If you'll pull out this orange sheet on the left side of your folder, we saw the original Bloom's taxonomy on the slide before, and I said there was a revised one. You notice that besides changing the names to make it an action verb, the people that thought it should be revised, wherever it came from, Old Dominion University, actually changed the order of the top 2. And you'll notice synthesis becomes creation, and it's hired evaluation. That's what Amber's activity is doing. They're creating something. Okay, they're creating a manual, and according to Bloom's, that's the highest order. And I think the one we're going to hear from the Psych and Philosophy group here is very similar, right, Ken?
Indeed, it is. I don't know when all you folks graduated from college, but I'll date myself. I graduated in '92, and since '92, the world has pretty much changed. These are still cookies, but cookies mean something else a lot now, too. I love my Java. Susan has there, and that means something else a lot now, too. So I was always struck by this idea that so much has changed, we have to continue learning. Well, how do we do that? How do we do that? How do we continue learning? Well, I read this stuff that Rick sent to us about quiz and quizzing, and this active learning technique is basically structured so the students have a great deal of input into the quiz. And I thought this because we have like 4, 5 quizzes, tests in the class. I said, why not for one? Why don't I enlist the students in making the questions? Why don't I enlist them in making the questions? So their first reaction was to get so excited. And that was really good because that kind of got some excitement going. So I said, okay, for just a minute or 2, we had 2 chapters which they were supposed to review, and I gave them some idea to review. What questions would you pull out? Everybody had to do 2 questions on their own. Okay? Then after a few minutes, they sat in groups like we kind of did, and they kind of combined their ideas together. And then we all talked about the questions, and we all picked, as we were going along, what the best ones were, what the best questions were. And a lot of people said real easy things, and some people said real hard things. Some people asked questions that stumped me, like, people wanted to know artificial intelligence, possible or not possible. And I was like, boy, I wouldn't bet against computers. That's all I would say to that. I wouldn't bet against computers. But the idea was people got asking questions. They got saying, how would they learn something? How would they learn something? And I asked the students, too, to evaluate each other's questions. What was that asking? Was that asking kind of like a simple thing? Like it says, just define critical thinking. Okay? That's a simple definition question. But then I asked people like to think about a little more complicated things like what are the characteristics of a good thinker? What would you add to the list? You know, maybe even be a little creative too. And people had all kinds of very interesting questions. I was quite impressed, my friend. I was quite impressed. I was impressed by how much people really got into it. And like I said to Nicole and I said to Rick, that's going to be their test. And if they fail that, I'm quitting. I got to tell you that. If they fail that, I'm quitting. But I think there is one question I'm going to put on the test. I'm going to say, presuming I'm in my right mind, why would I, as a teacher, kind of let you write the test? And hopefully the answer they will kind of get to, because we did kind of tease this out a little bit, was I wanted to really empower them about their learning. Because as I said at the beginning, so much has changed since '92. We have to keep learning. And the model I was thinking is, suppose you move to, say, Texas or some places that are New Mexico and you have to learn Spanish for your job or something. Well, probably the worst way would be just listening to things in your car and stuff and just letting it go one in and out the other. But I wanted to kind of give them at least some kind of understanding how you would teach yourself something. How you would teach yourself something. Then put them kind of in charge of knowing what kind of questions to ask and what kind of measures and progress to make. And I thought it went kind of well. I can't wait to see what happens tomorrow. If anybody fails, I guess I'm in trouble, but I think they'll all do kind of well.
I asked Ken to send me a copy and with his comments of did they do better, that if he had written the test, and that if it's interesting or there's something to learn, I'll pass it on to you and have all your names. You'll notice as he was talking, I was looking at this sheet and all the things under analyzing, evaluating, creating, every single one of those, comparing, contrasting, criticizing, deconstructing, they're basically all there, just not one simple exercise. So thank you very much.
And that was from that handout. There's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, this is a great handout. Did anybody else? Anybody else?
Yeah, please.
Sorry. Speaking of the handouts, I think one that you should, if you read anything in this package, this one about asking questions to improve learning. Marguerite came up with this in her research, and the way we promote active learning on the most continual basis, really, is not the activities we set up. They're great. But most of the time when we're doing a PowerPoint or we're explaining something, we have to ask them questions so we check on their understanding. And there's like 5 pages in here of how to simply extend your repertoire of questions to promote active learning. So you're not just doing it for part of your lesson when you have a group activity. You're doing it all the time, continually. And I found just in my position as a faculty development instructor, the one thing that new instructors need the most help with initially, before we get into activities, is question technique and how to ask supplemental questions. But I find the one area that they improve the quickest, where the learning curve goes up the quickest, is this one. Because once you are made aware of what you can do, it actually becomes second nature, and you start to remember the good teachers that you had and how they asked questions. I was in a class yesterday, and it was the second time I'd seen this new instructor, who's not here today, and she had a habit, the first class I observed, saying, how many have heard of, or, have you ever heard of, have you seen, instead of asking what she wanted. The first question she asked in the class, she started that way. After she got 2 words out of her mouth, she stopped. And instead of saying, do you know, she said, what is the definition of, or whatever the question was. So it was very affirmative. She was asking. Because I always say that if you say, does anyone know? The answer to that question is either yes or no. It's not, but if you show you want information, want them to think. What are the 6 things we learned yesterday? Why is this different than that? What's your opinion on that? Do you agree with that? I mean, there's so many tricks, and this handout really has it. Okay? So I hope that's helpful. You guys have been a great group, and I think we've all learned something from each other. I hope you have. If you'd be so kind enough to fill out the evaluation sheet, we do track these, and we do try to please take it seriously. We do take your suggestions and try to build them just as we want you to develop. We're trying to develop this program. It's only a couple years old, and as I said at the beginning, we put in more discussion and work time because that's what you say you want. Okay. Thanks very much.